They call it the Whispering Woods, a stretch of highway slicing through dense forest in northern Idaho. Truckers talk of strange occurrences there, lost time, ghostly figures, and eerie whispers. Charlie Doyle, a no-nonsense trucker, brushed it all off as superstitious nonsense until he drove through it one fateful night. Charlie had a midnight delivery of industrial equipment. His route, as directed by his dispatcher, took him straight through the Whispering Woods. It was a shortcut, saving 2 hours off his trip, and he wasn't one to back down from a challenge. The first few miles were uneventful. The towering pines pressed close to the road, their branches forming an almost impenetrable canopy that blocked the moonlight. His high beams barely cut through the thick darkness, and the forest felt alive, shifting in the shadows. Around 1 a.m. the radio crackled, but it wasn't music or chatter. It was a faint voice, whispering his name. Charlie. Startled, he glanced at the CB radio, but it was off. He shrugged it off as static interference, gripping the wheel tighter. A mile later, a figure darted across the road. Charlie slammed on the brakes, his rig screeching to a halt. Heart pounding, he peered into the woods but saw nothing, just shadows. He restarted the truck and drove on, but unease settled over him. The whispers grew louder, indistinct at first, then clearer. Turn back, Charlie, turn back. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He reasoned it away. His CB must picked up a rogue frequency, or maybe he was overtired. But then, the headlights flickered. The truck stalled to a stop, the engine dead. Charlie cursed, stepping out into the cold, damp air. He grabbed his flashlight and opened the hood, inspecting the engine. Everything seemed fine. That's when he heard a soft rustling in the trees, followed by faint laughter. It was high-pitched, almost childlike. He spun around, his flashlight sweeping the dark forest, but saw nothing. "Who's out there?" he called, his voice echoing. No answer, just more laughter. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw them figures standing between the trees. Pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes reflecting the beam of his flashlight. They didn't move, just stared. Charlie's breath hitched. "This isn't real," he muttered, backing toward the truck. The whispers surrounded him now, overlapping voices in an indecipherable chant. He scrambled back into the cab, locking the doors. The truck's interior felt oppressively small, the whispers louder than ever. His hands trembled as he turned the key, praying the engine would start. It roared to life, and relief washed over him. But as he looked in the rearview mirror, his blood turned to ice. A woman sat in the passenger seat, her head tilted unnaturally to the side. Her skin was gray, her lips cracked, and her eyes black voids. "Turn back," she hissed, her voice cutting through the whispers. Charlie screamed, swerving the truck violently. The cab shuddered as it veered off the road, crashing into a ditch. When he opened his eyes, the woman was gone. Dazed, Charlie climbed out of the wreckage, stumbling onto the road. A low rumble of an engine approached. Another trucker pulled over, his face pale as he stepped out. "You're lucky," the man said, helping Charlie up. "Most who see them don't make it out." Charlie didn't ask what he meant. He didn't need to. The haunted stretch of Whispering Woods was behind him, but the whispers never left. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard them calling his name, warning him to stay away from the darkness. Every trucker knows the road can be a lonely and unforgiving place, but some highways are darker than others. Route 66, often romanticized in songs and stories, hides its own share of nightmares. Among truckers, the story of the shadow hitcher sends shivers down the spines of even the most experienced drivers. What happened to Marty Harlan one foggy night has been whispered at truck stops for years. Marty was a long-haul driver with decades of experience. He scoffed at ghost stories, dismissing them as hogwash for city folks. But his skepticism was shattered one cold November night as he hauled a load through Arizona. The day had been uneventful, with vast skies and endless stretches of desert. By nightfall, a thick fog rolled in, consuming the road ahead. Marty's GPS malfunctioned, and his CB radio had been eerily silent for hours. The isolation felt suffocating. Around 11:30 p.m. he noticed a figure standing on the shoulder. It was barely visible in the haze, but the silhouette of a man became clearer as he approached. The figure wore a wide-brimmed hat and tattered clothes. As Marty drew closer, he instinctively slowed. The man raised his hand for a ride, but something was off, his head tilted unnaturally, as if his neck were broken. Marty felt a chill creep up his spine. He wasn't one to pick up hitchhikers, but he couldn't just leave the guy there, not in this weather. Against his better judgment, he stopped. The man climbed into the passenger seat without a word. Up close, he looked worse. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes seemed too dark, like twin voids. "Thanks for stopping," the man said in a raspy voice that didn't match his appearance. Marty forced a nod, gripping the wheel. "Where you headed?" The man smiled faintly, a chilling expression that sent a shiver down Marty's spine. "Just down the road," he said cryptically. For several miles, the hitchhiker didn't speak, and Marty's unease grew. The cab felt colder, and an unnatural silence filled the air, broken only by the hum of the engine. Marty noticed the man wasn't casting a shadow in the faint glow of the dashboard lights. Trying to steady his nerves, Marty glanced over, but the seat was empty. He slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding as the truck skidded to a halt. The passenger door was locked, and the man was gone. Marty sat there, breathing heavily, convincing himself it had been his imagination. But then, from the corner of his eye, he saw movement in the side mirror. The hitchhiker stood on the roadside again, grinning. His wide-brimmed hat shadowed his eyes, but his smile was unmistakable. Marty floored the accelerator, desperate to put distance between himself and the apparition. His hands trembled on the wheel, and his eyes darted between the road and the mirrors. He didn't stop until he saw the glowing lights of a diner ahead. He pulled into the lot, his rig screeching to a halt. Stumbling inside, Marty scanned the room for anyone he could talk to. The diner was nearly empty, save for a waitress and an older man nursing a cup of coffee. "You look like you've seen a ghost," the man said, eyeing Marty. Marty nodded, struggling to find the words. He recounted what had happened, his voice shaking. When he finished, the man's face turned grim. "You picked up the shadow hitcher," the old-timer said, his voice low. "They say he's the spirit of a drifter killed on this highway years ago. Truck ran him over in the fog, never stopped. He's been haunting drivers ever since, looking for revenge or someone to keep him company." Marty laughed nervously, but the man didn't smile. "You're lucky. Some say he never lets his passengers go." Marty didn't sleep that night. He stayed in the diner until dawn, drinking cup after cup of coffee, too shaken to get back in his truck. When the sun rose, he reluctantly climbed into his cab, vowing to avoid Route 66 at night. But the shadow hitcher wasn't finished with him. A week later, while driving through another stretch of highway, Marty's CB crackled to life. Through the static, a familiar raspy voice whispered, "Thanks for the ride." Marty slammed the CB off, his hands shaking. He never drove alone at night again, but no matter how far he traveled or what routes he took, he always felt a presence watching him from the passenger seat. Years later, Marty retired, but he couldn't shake the memories of that night. Truck stops still buzz with his story, and those who've driven Route 66 swear the shadow hitcher is more than just a tale. If you're ever hauling freight through the fog, keep an eye on the roadside, and whatever you do, don't stop.